thank you everybody for joining us for the East Street Redesign public information session. We have here our staff, the consultant group from Kittleson, and we're just going to go through some of the background for why as well, and also what to expect for this evening. So tonight we'll be discussing East Street, which is one of our city's original streets. I should say, by the way, that I and Dave Edmondson, and I am the transportation planner for the city of Frederick. So for centuries, East Street has been a really vital industrial corridor in Frederick, and has recently seen a lot of different projects, from extending south to I-70, the Carroll Creek Linear Park, and new developments that you doubtless see as you're driving or walking along there. But we're also looking at doing some more projects on or near the street. Tonight, we're going to go through what we hope you learn from us, and also what we hope we learn from you. We'll also go over how this is going to work. We do wish that we could meet in person, but we can't, so we're going to make this as interactive as possible. And then we're going to go through our introductions about who we all are. So what do we hope that you learn from this? So our long-range plans, as I mentioned, we have a lot of these, and a lot of them are going to be coming up and implemented over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. One of the big ones is the East Street Corridor Small Area Plan, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more in just a moment. The strategic plan, which is a 10-year action item list of all of the things that we as a city want to do and why, and the goals that we want to hit, as well as our 2020 comprehensive plan that just passed last October. We're very excited to see how that's going to go and help to shape our city as a vision. Out of these has been a few common themes. The first of them, which applies to East Street, is that all city streets ought to be welcoming and useful and comfortable for really anybody who is walking or rolling on a wheelchair or biking. We want to support existing businesses, as well as provide a fertile ground to grow new ones. And we want to support high quality streetscapes. One of the ways that we're looking at doing a higher quality streetscape is something called a form-based code. So one of the things that we are doing on East Street is something called a small area plan. Now we're at the very early stages of this, but we are going to be looking at how do we switch from something called a normal zoning code, Euclidean zoning, and where we look at the density, the uses, the floor area ratio, setbacks. It's very technical, and ends up being, it ends up placing a lot of restrictions on what you can do with a certain parcel. Something that we're looking at doing is a form-based code. that encourages a mix of land uses. It promotes a mix of housing types. It's proactive, and so it looks at what is the character of a place, what do people live there want it to be, and then how do we build that up, and how do we support that and help it thrive. It emphasizes the site design, so what's a place going to look like, and building form, so what's the architecture. It addresses the design of the public realm, and it defines a special sense of place, and it's predictable. So a street where you get to walk and you get to see the buildings and you get to enjoy them, that interface, that is the public realm, and that is what we want to look at, especially for East Street and East Frederick, which is such a vital part of our city. And East Street, as one of our main streets, really is the foundation for that whole area and sets the tone for it. And we hope that you learn a little bit about how this works, but also what we found. So in some of the areas that would be improved along East Street, or could be, in some of the directions that there are opportunities. And what do we hope we learn from you? So what we hope that we learn is, what's your vision in East Frederick? It's not just a place where people live, but also it's a place where people work and visit and shop. And it's also a place which folks drive through. And how can it serve your needs as someone that interacts with East Street on all of these levels? Another thing that we hope that we learn is, are the opportunities that we found so far ones that you think of as being really good opportunities? And are there things that we've missed? Another thing that we're interested in is are we functioning right now in doing this project? How can we best serve your particular needs and your particular interests as an employee, an employer, a resident, or just a regular visitor? Just a moment. So why are we here? As I mentioned, East Street is rapidly changing. East Street is complex. As you know, it gets wider and narrower and then wider again. There's the frontage road. There are shopping centers and apartment buildings and industry. There's Shab Row, and there's that long stretch south that has a traffic circle. It's complex also from an operational standpoint, and we'll be into that in a bit. But we want to know, how well does East Street work for its current users, and how well does it work for Frederick? What can we, does its current shape work for everybody? And how could it work better? Finally, I want to go over how this evening is going to work. So we're going to get a presentation from our consultants. They work with Kittleson Associates, and they are great. They are a national group, and they've been on the ground here trying to work out what do we have and where might we start to go. We're also going to do introductions for our team that are here. And we're also going to have a time for questions and also for feedback. So One is you can call in. Now there's about a 30-second delay, so there will be a bit of dead air, and I'm sorry, I know that that's bad TV, but we do want to hear from you. If you don't feel like calling in, you can send comments onto our website. So Channel 99, as you know, or as you may know, is online, and there's an e-comment section. If you go to the URL here, it's tinyurl.com/East Street Comment. Then you'll be able to access the comment section. You'll also be able to watch this online. Also, we are available on our YouTube page as well. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you can also go to this section and comment there, because I don't believe that we have comments available on YouTube today. Introductions. So lots of X's. Let's go through it. Tonight, I see that we have, first off, Brandon, do you want to introduce yourself? And then we can go from there.
Sure. I'm from City. I'm at City Hall, so I don't have a camera, but my name is Brandon Mark. I'm the Division Manager of Community Planning and Urban Design.
Shraddha? Oh, yes, go on.
Hi, I'm Shraddha. I work in the engineering department as a traffic engineer with the City of Frederick.
Lovely. And Shannon?
Shannon is not logged in to Teams to participate.
Oh, all right. We also have Lance as well.
Lance is unable to participate as well.
Okay. Aditya, why don't you introduce your team?
Yeah, I think Arash might be online as well from the city.
Oh, Arash.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Arash Kamani, urban designer, planning department.
Great. David, we have a slide with kind of our consultant project team. Do you want me to kind of go into our presentation, or do you have anything else before I jump into my slides?
Nope, it's all yours.
Thank you, David. So let me share my screen. Hopefully this works. Can you see my screen?
Looks great.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I'm gonna go to the next slide. So basically this is kind of the agenda for my presentation. We'll introduce our consultant team, go through some additional project background that's specific to this particular project. Then we want to kind of walk you through some of the existing conditions analysis that we've been working on, synthesizing some issues and opportunities, then talk through next steps, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So this is our team from the consultant side as well as the city and COG. So I think David just went through the city staff, so I'll skip that. This project is funded by MWCOG, which is Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, is the local MPO. And this project is part of a program called TLC, Transportation and Land Use Connections. And this basically means that we are working with the city staff, but it's funded by the Regional Council of Governments, and is one kind of discrete project as part of the larger vision that the city is working towards along East Street and East Frederick overall. So this particular project specifically looks at East Street corridor. And so you go from COG as a liaison for this project. And then as part of the consultant team, we have 3 consultants joined as a team. We have Kittleson and Associates, which I'm representing as project manager. Kittleson is kind of the prime firm. And then Yolanda Takishan and Elizabeth Gordon. Liz is here tonight with us. And they both are helping me as well as part of Kittleson team. Then we have Roadside and Harwell. They're landscape architects and planners. We have Dina Roadside today on the call, as well as Ron Sessoms. And then we have Seth Harry and Associates as local architects and urban designer as part of this team as well. So next, I want to kind of quickly go through project background. As I said, this particular project is kind of one piece of the larger puzzle that city is working towards, the larger vision. David mentioned form-based codes. There have been previous planning studies that have taken place as well. But this particular project that's part of the COG TLC program is really looking at East Street corridor. So the roadway and kind of the parcels nearby along the corridor. The study area, as shown on this map, basically spans from Montgomery Boulevard on the south side, just off of I-70 interchange, all the way till North Market intersection, all the way to the north. So it's pretty much the entire stretch of East Street through the city. And the goal of this project is really to look at this around 2.25 mile long corridor as a holistic corridor, looking at land use, transportation, urban design aspects, to advance some of the visions that have been established as part of the previous studies. This project leverages East Street's location and function to reinforce its value as an important place, community theme that kind of connects downtown to East Frederick community, as well as looking at the business and jobs and other destinations along the corridor. This slide kind of talks through the major project objectives. We have kind of identified 4 objectives. Number 1 is to reinforce the long-term vision for East Street as an urban mixed-use multimodal corridor. This vision has been kind of illustrated and identified in multiple previous studies, East Street Corridor Small Area Plan, a couple of ULI studies, East Frederick Rising studies, and all these studies kind of have a common vision of developing this corridor as a mixed-use urban multimodal corridor. Number 2, kind of subset to that, is redesigning East Street to enhance pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities. We know that there are multiple destinations along this corridor that attract a lot of people walking and biking. There is transit along this corridor with the MARC train station, as well as a lot of buses that start and end at the transit center. So we want to look at transit facilities as well. Then this project is also happening in parallel to the form-based code project that David mentioned earlier. So we want to kind of coordinate with that planning initiative and support kind of the recommendations that come out of that study to make sure that, you know, the recommendations we develop align well with the form-based code initiative that the city has embarked on. And finally, we want to test and produce an implementation plan based on previous vision or recommendations. So the goal really is to kind of advance some of the larger vision, to identify some concepts and projects, and to kind of test their feasibility. So again, this slide is showing the planning process for this specific TLC project. We started the project in November. We had an internal kickoff, a site visit, and then we started kind of downloading a lot of data and mapping and analyzing existing conditions. We've just wrapped up existing conditions phase, and we're really here at the public meeting. So at the start of the public and stakeholder outreach process. Looking ahead, after this public meeting, we'll be having another stakeholder meeting where we will kind of go into more detail of existing conditions analysis and test some ideas. After that, we will be developing recommendations, multimodal transportation, as well as kind of streetscape, urban design, and placemaking recommendations. We'll be presenting those draft recommendations at the second stakeholder meeting around May timeframe. And then based on the feedback that we get after that meeting, we'll be revising the recommendations and documenting the whole process in a final report by end of June this year. So as you can see, it's a pretty fast track process. This doesn't mean that the planning initiatives that the city is working on will work on the same timeline. After this planning project is done in June, we will kind of hand the final report to the city and COG. And I'm sure, you know, there will be recommendations in there that will need additional planning and design that will continue on the city side beyond this specific project. So as part of the next few slides, I want to walk you through the existing conditions analysis. And as part of this presentation, we want to really kind of present what we found, but we also want to know from you after the presentation if we've missed something or if there are other opportunities and issues that we should look into. So before we kind of begin any project, we love to kind of understand the historical context of that place. So that's where we started. We started all the way back to Samuel Duval Platt in 1782. That kind of really laid out the city. And even from those initial drawings, East Street was always part of that original design. East Street, with its name, kind of forming the eastern edge of the city. And today it kind of forms that eastern edge of downtown area and a seam between the downtown grid and communities on the east. Over the years, we've seen kind of development happen along East Street, kind of starting from that downtown Patrick and Market area, along Carroll Creek, kind of going up north. Initially, East Street stopped at Carroll Creek. It didn't really cross. And over years and decades, East Street has kind of been extended further south, all the way to I-70 now, in just last 20 years. So East Street has kind of evolved over the years, but it still continues to have buildings and as you're aware, the rail tracks that kind of take you back to some of the historic context of the corridor. The industrial heritage of this corridor, this being a transportation corridor with both passenger and freight trains running along the corridor, that some of these tracks are still in the streets or along the street. So it definitely has that historic context that's still relevant today. So we really want, as we look ahead, we really want to kind of build on that unique identity of the corridor, as well as kind of plan for future growth and the current needs for East Street. Next, we looked at all the previous planning projects and studies that were relevant to the corridor. I won't go through this long list of projects and plans, but we looked at everything from the 2020 comprehensive plan to East Street corridor small area plan, a few ULI studies that looked at East Street, and then some policy and design guideline documents like Fredericktown Historic District Design Guidelines, the Complete Streets Policy, and some recent projects like some of the bicycle facilities on North Market or 7th Street. We also looked at the capital improvements program to identify specific projects that are planned along East Street to really get an understanding of what's been done before so that we really build on the previous visions and not try to reinvent the wheel. This slide kind of summarizes our takeaways from our review of previous plans and studies. And it really kind of helped us develop those first 4 objectives that I presented a few slides back. All these studies are kind of talking about developing East Street into a mixed-use multimodal corridor. They all realize that East Street is an important economic corridor and a key gateway. There are a lot of jobs, shopping destinations, transportation destinations along the corridor. So it's an important north-south connection in the city. The comprehensive plan envisioned East Street as a more walkable and bikeable corridor, given that this is kind of the seam between the downtown and the communities to the east. Really, Frederick, the way it is developed, there are a lot of destinations within downtown that are within walking distance from East Street, and even on the communities to the east can kind of walk or bike to a lot of destinations in the city. So the idea is how can we enhance more walkable and bikeable environment along East Street. In terms of land use and density, East Street corridor is part of the density enhancement area. So the city is thinking of this corridor as a potential corridor to absorb some potential development, given some of the underutilized and vacant parcels along this corridor, as well as the opportunities that the MARC train station presents for a transit-oriented development model to flourish along East Street, as well as just even the bus-based transit. There are just a lot of bus routes that start and end at the transit center that provides opportunities for people to get to local destinations within kind of larger Frederick area by bus. So this corridor has great access and opportunities for development. And then the ULI report recommended extending the street grid towards east, and that's an important element. We kind of realized that the street grid kind of abruptly stops along this corridor and doesn't continue to the east. So really trying to understand how we can enhance that east-west connections across East Street. Then there was another study called Rails with Trails that recommended extending the shared use path. You would notice that there is a shared use path that's currently there on the northern end of the corridor. And this plan kind of recommended extending it till 8th Street and Market Street. Next, we want to kind of walk you through some of the land use and demographic analysis. This map is showing existing land use at parcel level, and you can kind of see that, you know, we already have a lot of mix of land uses along the corridor. Starting from south, we have the old Brickwork Site, which is currently vacant, a large parcel that provides great opportunity for a more holistic development south of the corridor. And then as we transition closer to downtown, we have a mix of uses where there are a lot of institutional uses, a lot of commercial uses, and even some residential uses just beyond the corridor in downtown area. And then transitioning further north, kind of north of 4th Street, we start transitioning into a more suburban context with strip commercial, with a lot of parking lots, some industrial, with Dairy Made, Food Pro, some smaller light industrial land uses as well. And then further north towards kind of North Market intersection, we see a more residential land uses, whether it's multifamily apartment buildings or single family on the west side of East Street. We also have some important open space connections. The Carroll Creek crosses East Street closer to the transit center. Plus we have the Monocacy Village Park on the northern side as well. In terms of employment, we mapped the number of jobs based on US Census and Bureau of Labor Statistics data. And not to anyone's surprise, we saw a lot of jobs in downtown as well as the hospital. But even along East Street, we have clusters of employment locations closer to downtown, along East Church, and then along some of, on the northern side, along some of the suburban shopping centers where there might be a lot of retail jobs, plus Dairy Made. So again, East Street is a very interesting corridor where we have a lot of mix of uses. There's residential, but there are also a lot of jobs along the corridor. Next, we want to kind of walk through transportation analysis. Looking at the street network, East Street is really a critical north-south link in the downtown grid. We realize that it's kind of functionally classified as a minor arterial, which basically means that, you know, we have to balance the needs of through movement as well as access opportunities. This is not a highway. It has a lot of uses that are directly along the corridor that people kind of get in and out of. It's an urban street with a lot of signals, especially in the downtown area. But then on the northern and the southern part beyond downtown, we do get a feel of a suburban street because there are not a lot of signals or crossing opportunities. There are a lot of stop controlled signs for the cross streets, but not East Street. So East Street has kind of a free flow traffic situation, which is not great for pedestrians and bicyclists trying to cross East Street into downtown or the communities to the east. Transit network is also very important for this corridor. Frederick Mark Station is on this corridor. And it's kind of interesting, we kind of put this map here to show kind of the overall MARC system, to really show that how Frederick is on a spur line. And that limits kind of the frequency and kind of access to DC. But again, it's an important connection where a lot of people kind of rely on MARC to get to their jobs and into the district and beyond. So it's a great asset on the corridor and to the city overall. So we have to find opportunities to better connect the surrounding neighborhoods to the Frederick Mark Station. But then beyond the rail, we have 6 shuttles and 7 connector routes as part of the bus transit system. And you could really get to anywhere within the city and kind of the larger region in the county with the bus system. So it provides great access along the corridor, even with the bus system. And then we also have the MTA commuter buses that serve Frederick on basically during peak hours on weekdays. Looking at bicycle facilities, currently we have very limited bicycle facilities. We have what we call sharrows, which is basically this symbol on the sign that indicates that people on bikes can share the travel lane. And that kind of exists pretty much in the downtown area, all the way from pretty much from South Street to about 7th Street. But this type of facility is not very comfortable for people who are not used to riding their bike with vehicular traffic, given that East Street is kind of a multi-lane roadway. Even though the posted speeds are lower, it's 25 miles per hour, cars do go fast, especially during off-peak hours when there might be limited traffic and just kind of 4 or 5 lanes of roadway space. It's really difficult for kids or seniors or even adults who are interested in riding but don't feel comfortable. So it's really not a low traffic stress facility. We do have a shared use path on the northern side from Peters Lane to about 15th Street, along the frontage where the new multifamily apartment complex was built. And that's planned to extend all the way to North Market and to the south to 7th Street. But again, we have some gaps in bicycle facilities today. This map also shows a lot of these dashed lines, which indicate what the city is planning. City has developed a draft bicycle facilities master plan. And although it's not adopted and it's still draft, we were looking at what are kind of the initial recommendations. And the initial draft recommendations for East Street are basically to extend that shared use path from North Market Street all the way to 7th Street, and then south of 7th to all the way to Montgomery Boulevard. Separated bike lanes have been recommended. So on-street bike facility that is physically separated from vehicular traffic, either through a curb or a landscape median or flex post or some sort of a buffer that would provide separation from vehicular traffic. In terms of pedestrian facilities, we do have sidewalks on both sides for about 50% of the corridor, really from Montgomery Boulevard to 5th Street. But even in downtown area, the sidewalks are narrow. They're kind of curb tight, and overall right-of-ways in downtown are pretty narrow. But then more importantly, we have large stretches of East Street that have no sidewalks on both sides on the northern part of the corridor. So from 5th Street all the way to about 9th Street, we have no sidewalks. So these black lines indicate sidewalk gaps. And then north of 9th Street all the way to Peters Lane, we have no sidewalk on the east side. And then again, on the northern end, there are some sidewalk gaps. And beyond kind of sidewalks as a pedestrian facility, it's also important to think about intersections and crossing opportunities. So these orange lines indicate crosswalks. And as you can see in downtown area, we have crosswalks and pretty much all legs on signalized intersections. So there are opportunities to cross East Street in the downtown area. But then beyond the downtown area, kind of south of South Street, there are limited opportunities to cross. There are some crosswalks at the roundabout and then at Montgomery Boulevard. But given that currently a lot of this land is vacant, there are limited need for crossing here. But as development occurs, there might be need for more crossings along this segment. But then more critically on the north side, where we have a lot of land uses currently that might attract pedestrian traffic, whether it's retail destinations or employment locations, we have very few crossing opportunities. Really, we have a couple of crosswalks at 9th Street intersections, and then really there are no crossing opportunities till about 16th Street. So long stretches without any opportunity to cross. The next section, we want to kind of talk through our urban design assessment of the corridor. we started looking at gateways and thresholds, and basically we were looking at gateways that are kind of major intersections that welcome you into the city. And we basically identified kind of 3 key gateways. One on the southern side, kind of off of Montecito Boulevard, where we have the roundabout. One on the northern side, North Market Street, which is kind of a key gateway into the corridor. And then one in the central part near downtown, East Patrick Street. This is also a gateway that's identified in a recent downtown streetscape study. So it's a key location for kind of east-west connection into downtown. And then we have identified 4 threshold intersections. And these are basically intersections that provide you access into surrounding neighborhoods. So South Street, and then 4th Street, 7th Street, and Delaware Road are these key thresholds. So these are kind of important intersections we want to focus on to make sure that these are kind of safe opportunities for pedestrians and bicyclists to cross, but also identify opportunities for placemaking and public art to kind of punctuate these locations along the corridor to make it clear that these are key locations that provide access to surrounding areas and into the corridor. Another thing that we have been developing are these character areas along this whole corridor. It's pretty clear from our analysis that this whole corridor is pretty distinct at various locations based on land use and kind of the street section with the number of lanes and just the feel and the character of the area. We've divided the corridor into 5 character areas. And we're basically trying to call them based on their land use type, as well as kind of, their proximity to nearby neighborhoods. So on the southern part, the Brickworks character area, it's basically kind of is punctuated by vacant and recreational land. It kind of spans from Montecito Boulevard to South Street. Then we have the downtown areas, which we have subdivided into 2 character areas, the kind of the downtown south from South Street to Church Street, which has a lot of commercial, recreational uses, the transit center, Carroll Creek Parkway. But, the buildings are kind of bigger footprint, bigger size. The number of lanes is basically the roadway is wider in this area as compared to what we're calling downtown north, which spans from Church Street to 4th Street, where kind of the character of the street is very different. It's much more narrower. The buildings are smaller scale. It feels much more pedestrian friendly, even if the sidewalks are pretty narrow. The overall scale is more humane and more kind of pedestrian oriented. In terms of land use, it has a lot of commercial and retail land uses, some residential, especially just off of East Street. Then the next character area is kind of industrial and commercial corridor, which goes from 4th Street to 13th Street. This is kind of the longest character area. And this is really kind of focused on light industrial and commercial land uses. Again, bigger footprint buildings. Buildings are set back with a lot of parking lots in front. And the whole character of the street is very different as compared to some of the downtown segments. And then finally, the 5th character area is the suburban residential. Again, a mix of multifamily and single family, some recreational uses as well. It spans from 13th Street to North Market Street. So the goal of this study is really to understand what are these different character areas, what are the needs, what are the issues and opportunities in these different character areas, and to develop unique recommendations that are context appropriate for these different areas, while also realizing that some elements like pedestrian and bicycle facilities need to be continuous all throughout the entire corridor. So next few slides, I'm going to kind of go a little bit deeper into these sub areas. Again, the first kind of the Brickwork Site, it spans from Montecito Boulevard to South Street. We have kind of 3 major intersections. The Montecito Boulevard intersection that kind of takes you into the corridor, the roundabout, and then South Street. A lot of the area is currently vacant with the Brickwork Site. There have been some development proposals floated around. I'm not aware of any specific development proposal at this time. But again, the overall vision is to develop this site into a more mixed use kind of planned unit development type proposal that kind of enhances this corridor's activities south of South Street. In terms of the street section, this is kind of the newest section that was built, I think, around 2006 timeframe, extending from South Street all the way to I-70. It is kind of 4-lane divided roadway, so 2 lanes in each direction with a landscape median that becomes left turn lanes at intersections. And we have landscape buffers and sidewalks on both sides. So it feels a bit more suburban, but it has continuous sidewalks on both sides and street trees. And as we go to the next character area, downtown South, again, it's spanning from South Street to Church Street. This is where we have a lot of important destinations. We have the transit center, we have Kettle Creek Crossing, we have the visitor center, the public schools building, and then also a lot of opportunity sites for redevelopment. We have, the Schaefer building, which is going to be the future police headquarters, the potential redevelopment site, which is currently kind of a parking lot, Wormore property next to Kettle Creek, the city-owned parking lot behind the train station that has been identified as a potential TOD opportunity for redevelopment, USPS that has been identified as a potential redevelopment site in some of the previous studies, and then the McHenry site at the intersection of Patrick and East Street. Again, so a cluster of opportunity sites right next to a train station that really bode well for this transit-oriented development model. And the city has applied for TOD designation with the state. And again, maybe somebody from the city staff can later kind of expand on that if we have questions. But the larger vision is to kind of develop this area as a mixed-use, higher density development around the train station to really develop this as a TOD. We've also mapped pedestrian and bicycle crashes, and this segment really popped up. We had 2 pedestrian crashes between 2015 and 2020. Unfortunately, one crash was fatal at the intersection of All Saints and East Street. And I think even more recently, we've received information about more recent pedestrian crashes at Patrick and East Street. So again, we are aware of the safety concerns in this segment. This is again an area where there's a lot of pedestrian demand given the transit center and some of the other uses. A lot of people cross East Street in this segment. So we really want to look at the intersections and crossing opportunities in this segment to identify what improvements we can make to enhance pedestrian safety. In terms of the street sections here, it starts becoming more urban. We don't have any kind of landscape medians, but the street is pretty wide in this segment. We have 5 lanes. We have those sharrows, the shared lane markings on outside travel lanes. But then we have pretty tight sidewalks, about 7 to 10 foot sidewalks right next to the curb. There's no landscape buffer. They're kind of street trees and grades. So it starts becoming more urban, but it still has that wide feel to it from a pedestrian perspective. Then going from Carroll Creek to Patrick Street, again, kind of similar cross section. It's just 4 lanes in this segment. Again, kind of sidewalks right next to the curb. And then as we start getting more into downtown, the streets start narrowing. We have even narrower sidewalks here. It starts to transition into that downtown streetscape with the brick sidewalks and street trees and grades. But still, it has 4 lanes in this segment. The next character zone is downtown north from Church to 4th. Again, important intersections in this area, the Church Street and East Street intersection, 2nd Street, where we have the Roads and Rails Museum, the Eveready Square and Chabro area, and then 4th Street and East Street, where we have St. John Cemetery and more kind of destinations. And the character really changes north of 4th Street. This is also the segment where we have kind of one-way network interacting with East Street. So we have Patrick, 2nd and 4th Street going one-way westbound, and then Church and 3rd going one-way eastbound. So we're kind of aware of the circulation system and how it plays an important role in the overall network in downtown. So as we develop recommendations, we want to be kind of consistent with the overall circulation in downtown area. In terms of the street section and the character, this area is much more narrower. It has kind of more pedestrian feel to it. Although the sidewalks are kind of tight and narrow, they're kind of brick sidewalks with street trees. Wherever possible, there's stoops and kind of 2 to 3 story structures that are more pedestrian friendly. Just 3 lanes, and those are also kind of narrow 3 lanes. So overall, it's kind of a more downtown feel to this segment. And that kind of continues through here. Some of the lane assignments change here. We have got just 2 lanes from second to third with 1 lane of on-street parking. It transitions again from third to fourth to 3 lane with on-street parking, really tight lanes. And we're really trying to map how this street changes almost from block to block, because, you know, as we start developing recommendations, we really want to understand what needs to change to kind of enhance this street while also maintaining kind of a continuous, consistent section for vehicular traffic, but also for pedestrians and bicycle traffic. So it's really understanding what are the dimensions we're working with, what is the lane configuration today. Then the next character zone is the industrial and commercial corridor from 4th to 13th. This is where we transition to kind of light industrial and auto-oriented suburban land uses. A lot of these buildings are kind of set back with loading docks or parking lots. This image kind of shows the loading docks for Dairy Maid. And, you know, when we were out there for our site visit, we saw how the trucks kind of maneuvered this, which was frankly a little bit scary to see the truck kind of back into these loading docks. And it was kind of scary when we were walking. And you know, there are no sidewalks in the segment. So this is a tricky area, and we'll have to kind of be really creative and be collaborative with our stakeholders to come up with innovative ideas to kind of enhance pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, but also try to understand the circulation patterns for Dairy Maid and see what we can do here, because it's a challenging location. Same thing with some of the other areas. You know, we have a lot of light industrial uses that need access with trucks coming in and out, but there's also a need for continuous pedestrian bicycle facilities as we transition to that overall larger vision for the corridor. In terms of street section, here we kind of get into this 4-lane undivided cross section. There are 2 lanes in each direction, but there's no median. And given the access, the number of driveways, the cross streets, this is really not a very safe condition, because, you know, the cars in the inside lanes are abruptly kind of slowing down or stopping to turn left, while, you know, cars behind them may not want to turn and they're at a higher speed. And these are the kind of the conditions that result in a lot of rear end or side swipe crashes, or kind of T crashes through oncoming traffic. So we want to kind of, again, look at this street section more closely. This also, in terms of bicycle facilities, has that share marking and outside travel lanes. Again, not a very comfortable bike facility to ride on. We do have sidewalks on both sides from 4th to 9th Street. Again, that kind of right next to the curb. So not very comfortable and not separated given the land uses. And then 9th to Delaware, this is again a very unique condition where we have the rail tracks and their own right-of-way next to the East Street width. And then we have a frontage road condition between 9th and Delaware that kind of adds additional right-of-way. And when we were out there, that frontage road was not really, it felt like it was not well utilized. You know, there were really very few cars. There's a lot of parking beyond the street and with all the parking lots fronting the properties. So this really provides a lot of opportunity to reimagine this right of way and think about how can we creatively create pedestrian bicycle facilities? Can we add more open space, park space with this really wide right of way that we have to work with? Similar kind of width continues from Delaware to Peters Lane. We don't have that frontage road anymore. That width is taken up by kind of, you know, park space, parking. The pump track is here. But again, a lot of opportunities to create some open space and better connections to Montecito Village Linear Park on the north side. In terms of East Street, you know, we still have that wide 40 feet curb to curb, but here we just have 2 lanes, and it seems like there's parking on curbside, but given how much parking there is beyond the street on parking lots, we didn't see a lot of cars being parked. So it really feels like really wide lane, like 20-foot lane each side, which again kind of induces people to speed when they see like wide lanes and less traffic. So creating dangerous conditions. And if you remember from that pedestrian facilities map, this is that segment where we don't have any marked crossings or signals. So people might be speeding through here, and there are very few opportunities to cross in this area. And then finally, the last character area on the north side, Montecito Village and north of downtown residential area. Here we have kind of Delaware Road as a major intersection, and then North Market Street as kind of the terminal intersection on the north side. We have Montecito Village Park that's in this area, as well as some other open spaces and institutional kind of schools on the northern side. There is a kind of a vacant parcel that's currently being redeveloped, Canterbury Station. So there'll be more housing that's being built. This multifamily apartment complex was recently built as well with the shared use path fronting it. So this is that segment where the shared use path will be extended to the north and to the south. And this is kind of the typical section in this area. Again, we have kind of one lane in each direction with on-street parking spaces on both sides, shared use path from Peters Lane to 15th Street. And then from 15 to Market, with kind of a similar width, but currently there is no shared use path, but it's planned to extend. So there will be a shared use path all the way to Market Street. So with that, I want to kind of summarize our analysis till date in kind of a set of issues and opportunities. This is really kind of a summary of what we've looked at, but also opportunities to what we can build on and develop our recommendations. So the way we kind of think about this corridor is, we need to enhance bicycle facilities along the corridor, especially on the southern part from Montecito Boulevard to 9th Street, where we currently have just those share the lane share markings. We need to fill sidewalk gaps to create continuous sidewalks from 5th to Market Street, where we have a lot of stretches with no sidewalks. Then we need to enhance east-west connectivity across East Street. So these are what these black arrows indicate, strengthening the street grid as we see more redevelopment happen on the east side, making sure that we have more crossing opportunities for people to get across East Street into downtown. And then we're highlighting some of the clusters where we see opportunity for redevelopment, the Brickwork Site, the opportunity sites next to the transit center, opportunity sites that have been identified in East Frederick Rising and East Street Corridor plans. And again, some more opportunity sites on the north. And then, as I said, we are kind of aware of all the different land use types and character areas. So when we develop recommendations, we want to be kind of sensitive to the land use context and develop context-appropriate urban design and streetscape guidelines. And finally, we want to leverage opportunities that are provided by that wider right-of-way between 9th and Peters Lane to maybe develop some sort of a linear park open space to add more open space along the corridor, extend some of the open space park system beyond the existing parks. So next steps, this is kind of the first meeting, and as you saw, we are pretty early in the process. We finished kind of data-driven analysis. We visited the site to kind of understand the conditions on the ground, but by no means we know everything that's happening in the corridor. So we want to hear from you. We want to understand what we might have missed, what additional issues and opportunities there might be that we haven't identified yet. We have the survey that's still open. So, we're getting some great feedback. We've got over 500 responses already. So we're kind of reviewing that. But kind of immediate next step, we'll be holding a stakeholder meeting, the first stakeholder meeting in March, to kind of go in a bit more detail for this existing conditions analysis, look at the survey results, and workshop some initial ideas, enhance on the issues and opportunities to start identifying what the recommendations could be. Then we'll kind of go back to our drawing boards in March and April to develop draft recommendations for multimodal transportation, as well as streetscape and urban design. Present those draft recommendations to the second stakeholder meeting in April. And then in May, we'll revise recommendations, and by June, we'll kind of document this whole process in the final report. So with that, I think we can open for any questions. Thank you so much for your time. Here's a link for the survey that's open, and it'll remain open till Wednesday, March 16th. And here's contact details for David. If you have any questions or if you want to follow up, there is his email and phone number. So with that, David, I'll hand it back to you for any questions we may have.
Thank you so much for that. So just a reminder, the phone number is 301-600-1213, and you can give us a call there to have your question on air. Just as a reminder, we have about a 30-second delay for people on channel 99 and about a 90-second delay for people on YouTube. So why don't we open the phones?
David, do you want to pull up the slide with the phone number that they can call on instead of the slide?
Sure.
Okay.
And just as a reminder, also, folks who are calling in, we have, our slide is up. We have about, so you'll have 3 minutes for comments. And all right. Do we have any comments online, Brandon?
There's no one on hold at this time. You may want to give it another minute or so.
Okay.
I've not received any e-comments either.
Alrighty then. So, Aditya, while we are waiting, what are some of the things that you've seen so far in looking at the preliminary results from our survey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, I was pretty surprised to see over 500 results in a pretty short amount of time. So it's really exciting to get feedback. I think what we saw through the results that we've got till now is basically a lot of people want opportunities to walk and bike along East Street, cross East Street into downtown or neighborhoods to the east. But also a lot of people also travel along East Street, not just with one mode, which was kind of interesting, right? Like a lot of people chose that they drive, but they also walk or bike or take transit. So it's really a multimodal corridor. And the comments kind of reflected that the current design doesn't respond to those needs. So although we have people who walk or bike or are interested in walking or biking, the sidewalk gaps that I mentioned, or the bicycle facilities that may not be comfortable enough for some people to ride their bikes on, that is really kind of an impediment for people to kind of walk or bike along this corridor. But there were a few comments, primarily from people who kind of travel along this corridor through driving. That we did get some comments that said that the corridor kind of works well for people who are driving, and there was some sort of a disconnect between people who are on the corridor, who might be kind of living or working right on the corridor and may need to cross it or walk along it for shorter stretches, versus people who are using the corridor to kind of pass through it. And that really goes back to that original functional classification diagram that I showed, where East Street is a minor arterial. So we kind of have to be cognizant of that dual role of this corridor.
Yeah, that is an interesting tension in any transportation planning effort, to make sure that it's about the place and also for its usefulness as a place that's between places.
Right.
Do we have anybody on hold at the moment?
Yes,
Any
sir.
additional?
Yes,
All
we
right.
have a couple folks on hold. I will begin transferring them.
All right, thank you very much.
Good evening. You may provide your comments. Please just state your name and general address, and your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ed Wormald. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for giving the East Street corridor so much attention, and we appreciate, all your hard work on it. You'll probably recognize, we're the owners of the property at Allstate Street and East Street. Tell me, is there an echo in the background?
I'm not hearing an echo, but you are a little bit faint.
Mr. Wormald, you may want to turn down any other devices that is broadcasting this.
Okay. Hang on one second. Okay, I think that will be better. So I was wondering if you've looked at density in this corridor. There's a big effort by the Downtown Frederick Partnership to try to, provide means for more residential, folks within the city. And it just seems like the East Street corridor is a perfect opportunity to do something that's a little bit removed from the downtown core on Market Street. And I just wonder if there's some thought of, allowing a little more density than what we see on Market Street.
Thanks. That's a great question. That's so density is not necessarily where we're going for as far as the form-based code, but we are looking at, among other things, a transit-oriented development area around our MARC station. There is, I should add, a plan in place at the state level to improve MARC service. Unfunded, but it is there. And it's certainly something that we will look at. So thank you so much for your comment, and we'll make sure to keep that in mind.
This is Brandon.
Yeah, it just seems like a perfect opportunity to, realize the downtown desire for more, retail customers and that type of thing. And, the San Antonio Riverwalk was one of the inspirations for the Carroll Creek Linear Park area. And one thing they did there is they made corridors with some density so that everything could be thriving in that area. And I just think it's a perfect opportunity to do a form that achieves that objective.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yes. This is Brandon. I would just note that the 2020 comp plan future land use map does have an area called the density enhancement area, where the plan is to explore eliminating or reducing density restrictions around the MARC station and East Street. So hopefully we can get working on that during the form-based code or shortly after.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. That's all the comments I had.
Thanks. Who's next?
Good evening. Thank you for calling in. If you could provide your name and general address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Also remember to turn down any devices that you may be listening to.
My name is Robert Law. I live at 1758 Wayfield Drive in Frederick. I hope they're going to be all busted up.
They probably will.
Go on ahead.
May I speak now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not only speaking for myself, but also several of my neighbors who live here in Dearborn, further out on 26, who regularly use East Street as a transit point between here and further downtown. And the thing that I'm really upset about and do not understand is that we have a real Gordian knot that is forming at the junction of Market Street and East Street near the school and the Coca-Cola bottling plant. The city is cramming even more development into this area, which is going to bring on more traffic. And we can't help but know that even as this area hasn't been developed yet, the traffic has become more and more dense and impacted with the conditions as they are now. And I had really hoped to hear how that was going to get straightened out. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that comment. You know, as a transportation planner, that is the thing that we are always looking at. And our strategic plan, as well as the transportation chapter of our comprehensive plan, is looking at this from a really holistic viewpoint, and how do we continue to grow without causing that kind of impaction, and that kind of problem. And I think that is a wider discussion. But thank you very much for this comment, and we'll be taking that into mind as we look at this corridor specifically too.
We have no one on hold at this time. You may want to give it a couple more minutes for other folks to call in. We did receive one comment regarding what our plan was with overhead utilities along the corridor.
All right. Brandon, do you have any comments on that specifically? Or Aditya, has this been something that you've been looking into?
Yeah, I can. Brandon, do you want to add anything?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, overhead utilities along the corridor do present a significant challenge, especially because undergrounding them or relocating them is a big expense. And as far as I know, I don't think there is any kind of capital improvement project specific to that along East Street. One opportunity that generally cities, communities explore is as redevelopment occurs, kind of asking the developer as part of the frontage improvements to underground the utilities. And it's kind of a slow, piecemeal process, but there have been corridors that have been able to kind of do that through redevelopment. So that's one kind of a longer term opportunity for the city. In the short term, we are gonna develop, so the way we are kind of thinking about developing recommendations is that we will develop some sort of a near to midterm package of recommendations that will work with, you know, kind of the existing challenges like the overhead utilities, or kind of not assuming kind of wholesale change of land uses or redevelopment, right? It's unlikely that the corridor changes immediately. So we'll kind of develop some recommendations that can be implemented in the short term that work around some of these challenges. Like one example is, can we, you know, develop some curb extensions wherever we have on-street parking to allow for some landscaping or green infrastructure that would provide some buffer for pedestrians, but also kind of have an understory tree that's not directly under the overhead utility, but kind of provide some greenery along the corridor. in the longer, but apart from the kind of the short and medium term, we're also going to have a longer term vision where, you know, we may look at, as redevelopment occurs, that the city can ask the developers to kind of underground the utilities as part of frontage improvements. Brandon or David, is that something that the city has done on other corridors as part of redevelopment projects?
I am not sure with my limited institutional knowledge at this time. I think there was an effort with downtown many years ago, but I'm not sure anything recently.
Okay.
I don't believe that we've done anything recently for utilities specifically, but I will say that we do have a fairly robust plan for street frontage improvements that are in our comprehensive plan. We do work with our developers to see what can be done there. And I know that I've been in plenty of meetings for street extensions and things like that that are paid for by the developers, and then we take it on and maintain it.
Yeah. I also want to quickly ask Ron from RHI to chime in if in his experience, he's done a lot of streetscape work, and if in his experience, if there are any other solutions with the overhead utilities.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so Aditya, I think you hit the nail on the head with, you know, all those different opportunities. You know, from a short-term implementation standpoint, we know that the overhead utilities are highly visible. You know, as development come on board, we know there's a lot of opportunity sites or several opportunity sites along the corridor that will provide opportunity for redevelopment, and whether or not those developments can contribute to the undergrounding of overhead utilities. That's something that will have to be coordinated as those projects come online. But there's a lot of opportunities to disguise. You know, we can use canopy trees and other mechanisms to help disguise that along the corridor. And those are part of some of the placemaking opportunities that we'll be looking at as part of this study. I think the both of you had talked about the sense of place, the character as an overlay of what we do on top of improving the overall functionality of the street. So we'll be looking at opportunities to, you know, make those overhead utilities not as obtrusive as possible. And those may include underground utilities, disguising them, cleaning them up. I know sometimes, you know, there's different categories of overhead utilities. Sometimes the more minor ones are a little bit easier to clean up. So there's a lot of opportunities to look at varying strategies to help fix that problem.
Thanks so much for that. I believe we have the person on hold.
Yes, sir. We have several folks on hold. We'll begin transferring them over.
All right, cool.
Good evening. Thank you for calling in. Please state your name and general address. Your comments will be limited. Good evening. Please state your name and general address. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and remember to mute any device that you're listening to. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Alan Feinberg. I live 5 doors away from East Street.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Hi, this is Alan Feinberg. I live about 5 doors from East Street on East Church, and I've been involved with the East Side for about a decade and a half. I found it East Frederick Rising. My question is, I'm not sure, I may have missed it because I had to step away for a little while, but I have not heard any discussion about the truck traffic.
I'm sorry, about the what? Alan? Mr. Feinberg, we missed the last word about the what?
I said traffic. Trucking is a huge problem on East Street.
Aditya,
Yeah.
what has your team found about that?
Yeah, it is, and it's primarily given the land use mix, especially in the north side of downtown, where we have a lot of light industrial, as well as like Dairy Made and Food Pro, and there is a lot of truck traffic. There's a lot of truck traffic that's moving kind of in and out of properties, so that kind of results in really wide driveways, loading docks, which presents a real challenge for kind of the pedestrian bicycle infrastructure that we would like to see along East Street. It's a real challenge because on one hand, these are locations where there are a lot of jobs. They're kind of economic engines for the city, but in the long term, I don't know what the kind of the overall city's vision is. So maybe David or Brandon, you can talk to that a little bit. But I would say we're gonna develop, as I said, near and midterm strategies to assume that some of these light industrial uses stay along the corridor and try and identify ways to make improvements, whether it's intersection improvements with pedestrian bicycle crossings, continuous ADA compliant sidewalk recommendations, or any kind of signage improvements to help with the circulation and existing kind of traffic patterns. In the long term, I think it really depends on kind of the larger vision. If we continue to see, say, 25, 30 years into the future, how much will this corridor transition from light industrial to a more urban? Because honestly, in my kind of gut feeling, I feel like as long as the industrial users are going to be there, they're going to need the truck movement to come in and out to service them. So that's kind of the challenge.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Not really. Not really. There are options.
We would love to.
Yeah.
If you want to email us with some of your thoughts on that, that would be fabulous.
I would be delighted to, for sure. Yeah,
right.
I have some ideas that could work for you.
All right, cool.
And one point
my email address is dedmondson@cityoffrederickmd.gov, and you can also find that on our website. We also have, just as a reminder, you can call in at 301-600-1213.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
I mean, I know the truck question is really critical. I want to kind of ask either Liz or Seth to chime in, because Seth, Harry has been kind of working on this corridor with East Frederick Rising for a long time, and he was involved in some of the previous plans, and I'm sure they might have dealt with this challenge. And then Liz has a lot of experience in other corridors with similar challenges. So I don't know, Liz or Seth, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Can you hear me, Aditya?
Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Some of the things I think that Alan was alluding to suggest alternative truck routes into and out of the corridor that would minimize the land use impacts and the pedestrian multi-use functionality of the corridor. But trucks are part of the urban landscape in cities everywhere. And I don't have a lot of specific experience with dealing with this issue from an operational point of view, but certainly I know that there are strategies that can allow that type of traffic to operate within a more dense urban mixed-use environment safely and effectively. And some of that relates to hours of operation, kind of minimizing conflict zones, addressing, again, intersection design, and where those pedestrian and truck and other vehicular conflicts typically occur, and trying to design the intersections to minimize those conflicts. So I do think it's a manageable issue. But again, long-term, looking at the transition of the land uses along the corridor, some other alternatives, including alternate truck routes and things of that nature, might be certainly worth exploring. And then, of course, long-term, as the corridor continues to transition from an economic and market point of view, ultimately the land valuations may certainly, necessitate sort of revisiting the where and how those operations might most successfully and economically operate within the larger Frederick City context.
Thanks.
Liz,
Liz,
do you have?
no.
Sure. I'm really glad I deferred to Seth. He certainly knows the local context better and covered the majority of the things I would have said. I think just the importance of continuing to involve those stakeholders and have that line of communication over for some of those operational strategies is really important. So thinking through access management, so you can minimize the number of times that the pedestrian facilities need to be crossed by these vehicles is really important because they're turning radii. The driveways for this type of vehicle need to be really, really wide. So figuring out if there are any locations where driveways can be consolidated for multiple lots, very important to do. And then the operational strategies about hours and traffic calming features that just have the trucks operating in a way that's appropriate for the context and the other users, I think is important when you're thinking of any vehicle type. And then as you're thinking through conversations with these stakeholders over time about transitions to their fleet, a surprising amount of difference can be made by if they find that they can replace vehicles with vehicles that are quieter or smaller or whatever the technology changes are that make sense for them. Making sure that they know that that's a priority and figuring out opportunities to support can also be a sort of medium-term strategy. Not sure if there's anything I've missed.
No, that's great. I do want to make sure that we get to all of our callers. So 301-600-1213. Do we have anyone else on the line?
At this time, we have one more.
All right.
Good evening. Thank you for calling in. Please provide your name and general address. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and remember to mute any devices that you may have on. You may begin now.
Hello, this is Kevin Zellner on East 5th Street.
Hello, Mr. Zellner.
About 4 years ago, the city formed the East Street Corridor Advisory Panel. And in that panel were all members of the local community, from residents to the businesses to NGOs, and Mark Davis from the city staff was organizing that activity. One of the thoughts for the 4th Street to 9th Street area that you characterized as minimal sidewalks and constricted lanes, etc. One of the things that was brought up for long-term resolution might be a city commitment to assisting some of the light industrial companies along that corridor to move to a city incentivized light industrial complex just outside the area, so that the businesses could remain viable, have easy access to the downtown and the major thoroughfares. And as the last member of your team said, in terms of market-driven choices for what's going to happen in that particular segment, that might allow for mixed-use development in that area. So I'd like you all, your group, to consider that long-term solution in terms of a partnership between the city and those light industries to move just a short distance away, provide incentives for them to do so in the long term. Now, this they should remain viable and intact for a good many years. But as the market changes and the city growth continues, if we set up something for them to pursue their business interests just outside of the area, that may help in terms of what East Street Corridor could do, as well as maintain their active businesses. So the East Street Corridor Advisory Panel summaries are still available. If you'd like to see them, we can certainly compile them and forward them on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Selner. That is great institutional knowledge for the area. We've got a lot of businesses that have been there for a very long time indeed. Aditya, have you had access to those?
I don't think so. If we can, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, if we can request those, that'll be great.
We'll be sure to send them on. Mr. Zollner, if you could also send those on. I'll be sure to be in touch. I believe that we've emailed back and forth previously, and so I should have your email address on file. Do we have any e-comments or other callers?
At this time, we do not have any more callers, and we have not received any e-comments.
Okay. Well, so we have a number of folks. Why don't we give this another few minutes while we are waiting? One of the interesting things that I find is when I come to a new city, it's always great to see something new and to look at it from a new vantage point. What were some of the things that you saw that make this sort of a unique project for your team? And that's for you and for really anybody else that's on the team.
Yeah, I mean, I can start and then, I don't know, Dina, Ron, Liz said anybody can chime in. I mean, basically, I was really excited to visit the downtown area and really experience how East Street kind of becomes part of the downtown, but also changes the character along it. The historic context with the rail tracks, the opportunities for redevelopment, as well as kind of the access to transit. So this corridor was really exciting on multiple fronts, and it really felt as if like there's tremendous potential along this corridor. So it was really exciting, the mix of kind of history, opportunity, and transit all together.
Cool.
Anyone else? Yeah. You're on mute, Ron.
There we go. I think agree with Aditya. I think the rich history, particularly around the railway along the corridor, not only have the tracks, but you also have some of the overhead cable mechanisms that still exist. So I think that's a very rich part of the East Street Corridor that still exists. And I think looking to other communities across the country who have been able to keep that history intact and use it as a way to create a sense of place. And those are the type of things that we'll be looking at as part of this study, not only the functionality of how the street works, how the people get along the corridor in a safe and efficient manner, but we'll also be looking at, what is that finer grain feel? What's the emotion that one would get as they experience the corridor. And there's a lot of good pieces, a lot of good bones along East Street. Shab Row, that historic context at that location that moves beyond the transit history of the corridor. So I think there's a lot of good bones, I would say, for the East Street Corridor to build upon and make it a really special place.
Yeah, I remember seeing those overhead poles just as we were walking as a group. And since it was a section that didn't have and the sidewalk, I'd never seen those before. So that was really cool to just notice and see from the ground. Anybody else have anything that they wanted to share about the corridor? Yeah, Liz.
Yeah, I just want to really echo what Ron said about how interesting a place it is from a historical standpoint. And there's also something kind of interesting about the really inconsistent cross section, which feels like a bit of a liability for the corridor, but is in a strange way a bit of an opportunity, because you have this sort of constrained section that is really metering the capacity of the corridor because so many trips are going all the way through that corridor. So I think there are opportunities to think about that space in a way that's more creative and more interesting and potentially more effective from an operational standpoint than typical.
Lost Liz.
Oh no, we may have lost Liz. Oh, you're back.
You're
Sorry
We
about
lost you
that.
for a second.
Where'd you lose me? It's not really that important.
Operational standpoints and how that is a really interesting opportunity, as you were saying.
Yeah, it's just it sets up a different set of challenges and opportunities for the design team to think through than a typical suburban corridor where the volume is as high as you would expect from a 4 to 5 lane street end to end. So we've heard from a caller that there are traffic issues in certain locations, and that's definitely to be taken seriously and dealt with. But I think the fact that volume is sort of metered through the corridor by that narrower section does mean that some of these operational challenges can be dealt with more easily than we might expect from sort of spot solutions or strategies.
Mm-hmm. That is an interesting aspect of it. And I know when I first looked at this, it was so interesting to see that narrowing and then the widening and how the traffic flows through there. Do you have any other callers?
Yes, we have one more.
All right.
Good evening. Thank you for calling. Please provide your name and general address. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Also remember to mute any devices that you have. You may begin now.
My name's Elizabeth Rood. I live on North of Market Street.
Hello.
Hey,
Good evening.
how you doing?
Good.
I'm sorry, I came in late, so if this has already been covered, I apologize. But I just wanted to reiterate that corridor is a really great way to get north to south as a pedestrian or a cyclist. It's the shortest way, say, from my house to the train station. And there's a couple of things that really need to change for the pedestrian and cyclists. One of them, of course, is sidewalks, which I'm sure you already know. And along with sidewalk, street trees. It's a very harsh environment to walk down East Street between, say, 9th and, and that corridor down. There's no shade. And from a cycling perspective, those train tracks have got to come out of the road. They're very dangerous. I know several people who have fallen with significant injuries from riding over those tracks. You're probably tired of me saying this because I did the survey and mentioned that many times. So those are just the two things that I think are important for that corridor is improving the pedestrian amenities, including shade and street trees, and improving the cycling conditions by getting rid of those railroad tracks. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Aditya, do you want to give any brief thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I want actually Ron to chime in on if he has any thoughts about how we can use that extra right of way to really create some sort of open space with shade trees that can really change the character of that segment that we're talking about, right? Like there are a lot of opportunities there to enhance, to address some of the issues that the caller was talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And, we have a very unique opportunity along the East Street corridor with those wider right-of-way areas to make better, more enhanced connections. We can incorporate greenery such as street trees and other ground cover, just make it more of a linear park experience. And when we say linear park, we're talking about areas, you have parks, which are nice, but we can also create these linear green spaces that create almost park-like spaces along a corridor to make them more interesting. Think about the Greenway Trail to the north end of the corridor. We can continue that style of multimodal connections that can accommodate bikes and pedestrians down to the south because we have the right of way to do so, but also make it a very special place with those enhancements to make them not only comfortable, but make them beautiful places that create a really nice gateway into the center of the city. So we are thinking about those opportunities and again, how we can layer those other elements to the streetscape as well beyond just the green canopy, which would include things like public art, having places where people can sit, people can enjoy the corridor, particularly as it begins to redevelop and you get more mixed uses along the corridor, and it's going to become even more of an attractive place for people to walk, stroll, and just spend some time. So we just want to make it a corridor that's comfortable and one that that's beautiful for the city.
Thanks.
Yeah,
that is.
David, if I can add quickly on the bike facilities, yeah. I think one challenge, and you actually brought this up in our site visit, and I don't know if our callers is still online, but one challenge is a lot of the destinations, except for maybe Mark, are in downtown where people coming from north will have to cross East Street. And especially in the downtown area, given how kind of narrow it is, we'll have to figure out transitions from the shared use path to bike facilities on either side of a roadway, so that we'll have to develop some sort of a crossing opportunity, or think about shared use paths on both sides, some sort of a facility that is continuous and that allows for easy crossing into downtown.
Yeah, that's very true. How do you get across the road? And also, cycling is going to be as useful and as comfortable as driving. What are some of the ways that we have to accommodate things in a way where it's not just having a singular bike lane, but also ensuring that it's safe for a kid that's heading to school or something similar? Do we have any additional comments or calls?
We have one person on hold.
All right.
Good evening. Thank you for calling. Please provide your name and general address. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. You may begin now.
Elizabeth Rood, North Market Street.
Hello again.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just wanted to reiterate my comments about the railroad tracks in East Street. It's not really in that downtown sector with the 2 lanes. It's more moving north. The most dangerous segments are between, I would say, 5th Street and 9th Street, particularly that area in front of Rockwell Brewery and Showroom Restaurant. And that's an area that people do ride their bikes, and that is a destination. So I just wanted to clarify my comments there, that in terms of taking out the tracks, they're really not dangerous in the part where the road is 2 lanes. They're more dangerous where the road is, where you have more space. in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think just to clarify on that, I think the way I identify the issue was there are a couple of locations where the track crosses. I think at 8th Street, just beyond Dairy Maid, we have the tracks that go from being in the street to kind of next to the street, right? And that's where they cross at an angle to the road. And if you're riding your bike in the street on the outside lane next to the curb, that's when you will have to actually cross the tracks. And that's where it gets really tricky. I lived in Philadelphia for a couple of years, and there are trolley tracks everywhere. And I exactly know how problematic that is when your tires kind of get stuck in the tracks and you basically had to crash and fall down.
Yeah,
the other
that's
location,
exactly where it's dangerous, because there's also the pavement is eroded next to those tracks. So
right. And then there are a couple of other locations where we have spurs that are going in, like at 5th Street near that substation, where again, so wherever these tracks are crossing the street and the outside lane next to the curb, those are the problem areas that I think even if the city may not be able to remove the whole tracks in the street, even if it's kind of more localized where these tracks cross the street, and that's kind of where the bicycles have to interact with them, I think that would be a huge help.
Well, I'm at a loss to understand why the city cannot take them out.
I'll defer to David on that.
We certainly can. It is an issue of cost and priorities. I'll make sure to speak with our maintenance team to see sort of what the costs on that would be. We also want to make sure that once we have, or we don't double our work. So repaving a street can actually be quite expensive. I know that this is a big safety issue, especially nobody wants to fall in a busy street. That is just extremely dangerous. I'll speak with them about some of the interim measures that might be able to be done, and also make sure that when we do have some preliminary designs, that the segment that has those tracks is one of the first that gets done. We don't want to place people into a situation where they're going to get hurt. And I know that right now, that is what is there, which is not something that we want. We do also want to make sure that what we do is not going to be doubling our work, and we do things right the first time. Thank you so much for the call. Do we have any other calls or comments?
No, sir.
All right. So why don't we wrap this up then? So I'm going to put up a slide that's got our next steps. Thank you, everybody that came in, that called in, that has filled out the survey, who took some time out of your day to watch this, and hopefully you got as much out of it as I did. What our next steps are is, first of all, if you haven't done our survey, please do. Check out our project website. It's tinyurl.com/East Street Redesign. You can also look at that just by searching for the City of Frederick transportation. And then you'll find all of our items, the 7th Street bike lane, our planning shelf, so various plans and products that we've we have done in our past, as well as this one. We're also going to have up there a map. So if you have filled out our survey, the interactive map is going to give you a way to click on a space and add comments. if you are involved at all in our comprehensive plan feedback, that is a very similar tool. Finally, if you're interested in being a stakeholder, this is a little bit of an extra time out of your day, but we'd like to have a frank and clear discussion with people who are representative of that of East Street. Email me. My email address is dedmondson@cityoffrederickmd.gov. You can also find me on our staff directory online, as well as, again, my email address is on the transportation page. Space is limited, so that it is a smaller group, but we do really want to have you apply and express that you are interested. So with that, Aditya, thank you so much. Liz and Ron and Dina, as well as Brandon, who was on our calls. It was just great to have you all here, and thank you so much for taking your time. Aditya, do you have any final comments?
No, thank you so much for your time. Great feedback, and looking forward to working on the next phase of the project.
Awesome. So all of you out there, be looking out for this in April, May for our next meeting. Hopefully by then we will be able to meet in person, but yeah, fingers crossed. And until then, thanks so much, and have a wonderful evening, all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.